Hi, I'm Shawn Douglass, an actor and director in Chicago, Illinois, and also a member of the theater department faculty at Northwestern University. And this is An Actor's Arc. Henry Godinez is a wonderful actor whose artistic arc also led him into directing, teaching, co-founding Chicago's Teatro Vista, and he is also a resident artistic associate at the Goodman Theatre. Hi, Henry.
Hey, Shawn.
Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I know a little bit about your arc because we've moved in the same circles over the years, but I'm interested in the entire arc of your acting artist journey. And I don't know a lot about the beginning of it. And I wondered if we might just start there and with a question something like, how did it all begin for you? Or what was the thing inside you that made you think acting?
When I was like in 5th or 6th grade, there was like a public speaking competition at my grade school, like almost like a speech contest, for students that that wanted to do a speech about something important. And of course, my mom, who, as an immigrant was like, just fiercely American, fiercely patriotic, helped me craft this speech about, for some reason, I had the impetus to want to be in it, right, to participate. And she helped me craft this incredibly patriotic speech about, and now in hindsight, I would imagine extremely Republican and conservative in nature as well, and I entered this competition and did, really well. I guess I won my grade or whatever, and so maybe it was something about that. But then when I was in 9th grade, toward the end of my 9th grade year, I was in a study hall and I hated it. It seemed boring, and my little sister was in a drama class, and she said, "Hey, this drama stuff is kind of cool. You should take a drama class." And so I asked if I could transfer in and get out of the study hall, and I did, and I just loved it. And one of the first days in the class, the teacher took us out to the auditorium, backstage, and had us walk onto the stage, this big stage, big auditorium, public high school in Dallas, and I remember very distinctly walking out on the stage and looking up at the lights, like some sort of like TV movie or something, right? And thinking, wow, this is cool, man. And then I just kind of, after that, just kept doing it and enjoying my friends that were doing it with me. And in college, it seemed like the normal thing to do would be be a drama major. And all the while thinking that, well, I'll eventually become a diplomat or something, or a forest ranger, or something. And but maybe it helps to be kind of dumb, as you're starting to be an actor, because I was just sort of like, or not dumb necessarily, but like well, why not? And just kept doing it, and was blessed enough to do an internship after undergraduate school at the Actors Theater of Louisville for a whole season. Poor as a church mouse, living on food stamps halfway through the year, because you couldn't work outside of the theater. But man, I mean, that's where I learned everything. And literally everything that then eventually allowed me or assisted me in co-founding Teatro Vista and becoming a director. It just taught me everything about theater, made me love theater as a whole, as much as acting. So that's more or less how it started.
Cool. So that already took us halfway into your arc, at least, I think.
Yes, good. Phew. Now we can just chat the rest of the time.
Ah, so let's just back up a little bit. So you mentioned first that your mother was a Cuban immigrant, right?
Yes. Yeah, yeah. My family came when I was very little. I was 3 years old.
Her getting you into the speech contest led you to doing plays in high school.
Yeah, plays in high school. Um, a lot of competitions, a lot of forensics tournaments,
Hmm.
competitions were big back then, where you would send a team to compete against other high schools and in speech and debate and oratory, but also in like what we call dramatic interpretation, which were basically monologues, duet acting, all kinds of stuff, choral, what we called readers theater, which were sort of choral readings,
Hmm.
poetry, readings of poetry, readings of prose. And I loved all of that. I really did. I loved, especially reading prose and poetry. I really loved that.
So
So,
as a student in college, then, what do you remember about that? About what things you learned, what you
mm,
felt acting was when you were that
yeah,
age?
man.
Was there a teacher that influenced you deeply during that time?
Oh, definitely in college. And in high school, um, my first teacher, John Mansfield, he would have us for class, basically, he would have us sit and listen to old recordings of Andy Griffith telling stories,
Hmm.
and it was mind blowing. I mean, Andy Griffith was an amazing storyteller. And then he would show us films. And I remember a very, very formative thing was when he showed us a Peter O'Toole film called Lord Jim, which I don't think was one of his greater films, but it blew my mind,
Hmm.
because Peter O'Toole just blew my mind. I just thought he was, I'd never seen an actor like that, really. At least it had never struck me how amazing he was. And then in undergraduate school, my professor in undergraduate school just really made me fall in love with classical work. I think that's where my love of Shakespeare started. He turned me on to Shakespeare, and the Greeks and
What was
Irish.
his name?
Patrick Kelly. He's like one of the great gentlemen of the theater. He's
Okay.
very old school that way. Um, and but made a huge, huge, huge impression on me. Yeah,
By introducing you to the classics
to the
or to
classics. Yeah,
Shakespeare.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. You know, Again, in retrospect, those were, that was the '70s. The late '70s, and I lament the fact, of course, in retrospect, that in those 4 years, you know, uh, I can't blame him because that's not where he came from, but in 4 years of college, I never intersected uh, with a Latino playwright,
Mm.
or Latino material. Um, that, but now actually I realized that Pat did direct the very first Latino play I ever encountered,
Mm.
and that was the year after I graduated from grad school. He asked me to. He also was a director, a professional director, and he was directing a production of Eduardo Machado's play Broken Eggs at a small equity theater in Dallas called Stage Number One at that time. And that was extremely important, and impactful for me because that's where my whole journey of rediscovery and of my Latino culture, my Cuban culture, but the broader, um, broader place in the broader Latino community landscape and theatrical landscape, uh, was completely kicked off by that experience.
Oh, wow.
Um, that's where my career as an actor, but really as a theater person, took on a dual sort of path of classical, primarily Shakespeare material, and contemporary Latino work. So while I lament I never had that experience in college or grad school or as a year as an apprentice, you know, he did give me that entry, and it was a very, very important one. You know, those were different times. You know, there was less sort of, you know, kind of out there awareness and ownership and sort of kind of articulation of culture and ethnicity and pride and but primarily connected to what we do in the theater, you know. There had been attempts at creating a Latino theater movement, you know, and this certainly dates way back. You know, I mean, there was Latino theater in the 1800s, of course, in Texas. There was Latino theater in New York and elsewhere in the early part of the 20th century. But then you had people like Luis Valdez and Teatro Campesino in the 60s that really, really started what we now know to be, you know, contemporary Latino theater movement. You know, Maria Rim-Fornes in New York, Puerto Rican Traveling Company, but those were still so young, you know, and under the radar, and that it was really then in 1985, in the mid 80s, that a whole nother generation of playwrights like Eduardo Machado, Jose Rivera, Migdalia Cruz, Cherie Moraga, that's when it really exploded. And they were standing on the shoulders of the Luis Valdezes, of the Maria Rim-Forneses, you know. So I was lucky. I happened to be actually literally kind of catching the wave.
Let's go back and talk about just about craft and
Mhm.
artistry and what your experience in graduate school, where you didn't have these experiences around culture that you related to, but you went to a pretty impactful program,
Very
right?
intense. It was a classical training program, 3-year classical training program, um, because you know, I fell in love with Shakespeare in undergraduate school, and then spent a year in, like, you know, the womb of new contemporary American theater at Louisville, right? All new plays, all new stuff. Um, but I realized at the end of that if I was still going to be an actor, what interested me, and I told one of our directors, I said, I love this new stuff, but I love Shakespeare. And she's like, well, then you have to go to this school. And
And what was
and
that school?
well, at the time it was the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee. It was the Professional Theater Training Program, the PTTP, at the University of Wisconsin Milwaukee, and it was very much a product of the faculty that founded it. You know, Jewel Walker, Leslie Rydell, Sandy, you know, Robbins, Susan Sweeney, and they were the ones, Jewel in particular, that brought Tadashi Suzuki over, and for the first time, and Suzuki began working in the United States through this training program.
What did that work do to you or for you?
Oh my gosh, it well, that training program completely transformed me, um,
How so?
physically. This classical program was so intensely physical. Every day for 3 years, we did Suzuki, we did yoga, we did Feldenkrais, we did Alexander, we did aerobics. We had to go to the gym 3 times a week. But, you know, I mean, it transformed me
Mm.
physically, into a person I had, you know, had never been had never been that confident in my body or any of that, or in my movement. It instilled an intense, maybe too intense, sense of discipline in me
Mm.
that I never had before. I don't know that it made me a better actor, I'll be honest with you, at least initially, because I think what it did was it made me intensely aware of my acting, which is probably on purpose. You know, they tore us apart psychologically, physically, and then put us back together, which is, I suppose, what grad school, what a conservatory does to a certain extent to a young actor, you know. But it made me anyway a little acting machine, voice and speech machine.
Mm.
It wasn't until I got to Chicago and encountered Kyle Donnelly and Meisner that I think I actually started to become an actor, a better actor. I mean, I will say that there were two really influential things, and one was Suzuki, because Suzuki did give me a groundedness that I think has helped me tremendously. It also introduced me to Zen, and then sort of the way of Zen, which has become a huge part of who I am. And I don't mean necessarily like really spiritually in the real truth of Zen Buddhism, but more in the sense of Zen being a temperament or an energy or a way of looking at the world,
Mm.
that was that I really loved and embraced.
Just for those who don't know, can you just say a little bit about Suzuki and his method?
Absolutely. Tadashi Suzuki was an avant-garde Japanese director, and he devised this actor training system method that is very, very rigorous, very physical. It's all based in kind of a combination of martial arts and kabuki and no, which are the two classical forms of Japanese theater. And he sort of melded them together into this movement training that is super, super grounded and focused and intense, that has everything to do with your connection to the earth from the waist down, and power in your legs and in your feet, and absolute calm and stillness from the waist up.
Hmm.
So it is about this sort of dichotomy of performance that has to do with like in power in connection to the earth, and stillness and grace uh, in the upper body. It creates a huge spectrum of possibility and performance, all of it full and connected and unencumbered, straight energy from the feet to the audience. What's great is that it completely, because it is so physically rigorous and intense and exhausting, it tends to break down any barriers that
Mm.
filters that we put up of, whether it be, any kind of doubt or reservation or insecurity or, timidness, any of that, gone, gone. There's no room for it because it's about survival, literally, and breath, and literally being able to breathe. And the other huge influence was the other end of the spectrum from that was a crazy Romanian director that the school brought in our third year, at the end of our third year, very end of the 3 years, to direct Richard III. His name was Alexa Vissarion, and he was this outrageous, well-known Romanian film and theater director who had never worked outside of the Eastern Bloc. And this is 1984. And he
Uh-huh.
came and directed Richard III, and he was like a kid in a candy store, right? Because he took that play and he weaponized it against communism, and it's like, but he had so much passion. He could only speak about 6 words of English, but they were really important words, because he would always say to us, he didn't care. That was the best thing, right? He didn't care about how we sounded speaking Shakespeare. Could care less. He couldn't understand it. All he cared about was the passion. And he would say, it's necessary for life, for love, for art, and that was literally about the extent of what he could say in English, literally. And it made such a huge difference. And I'll never forget, because I was playing one of the 2 murderers that kill Clarence, which on the surface you think, oh, nice scene, but Well, it so happens it was his favorite scene in the whole play. So he rehearsed us in secret. He rehearsed us in secret. And the great Steve Tagg was playing Clarence, and the two of us murderers. He again, he could care less about the language. He said, you know, you come to the castle, to the tower, and you to get up the courage to kill Clarence, you bring wine and bread and meat, and you have party, and so he had us like drinking bottles of, not real wine, but like, having and eating, and the more raw and disgusting the better. He would have us biting bread and eating, and then they're laughing at each other and spitting on each other, and like, just it was so messy, and I loved it, because after 3 years of like, you know it was like so freeing.
And
So
so,
free.
so you began in Dallas, you spent time in Louisville, you spent time in Milwaukee in this training
Mhm.
program.
Yeah.
Is that when you came to Chicago?
Yeah, it is, because I was cast. One of my classmates had already met an agent, had been working with an agent here in Chicago, Elizabeth Geddes, and had told them about me and said, "Hey, they want to meet you." So I came down, and I met with Geddes, and I walked in the office and talking to Paula Music, and she said, "Hey, can you go to a movie audition right now?" And I was like, "Yeah," never been to a movie audition. So I went to the great, Dick Cordos and Ann Charbonneau, to their office, and auditioned for a Chuck Norris movie. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna get this movie," and I didn't, but it got them to like me. And then I was cast in a play at Wisdom Bridge Theater, a kabuki play, Kabuki Medea,
Mm.
and so
A
my Suzuki.
legendary Chicago production, right?
It was amazing, and that was a remount. They had done it the year before, and it was so popular that they remounted it. Barbara Robertson, one of the most amazing performances in the history of Chicago theater, playing Medea. She was just amazing. The great Shozo Sato directed it. So that's why I came to Chicago to do that play. And then I did end up doing a film, a TV movie right after that, of Lady Blue, called Lady Blue, and a pilot. And then was really fortunate to just kind of keep working through Geddes, through that agency, and doing others, some theater and stuff like that.
So in those early moments, whether it was Kabuki Macbeth or some of those other early experiences,
Mhm.
what, if anything, began to shift in you as you sort of left grad school and that rigidity that you talked about in the rearview mirror? What do you remember, moments of epiphany, or watching someone work, or working with a director who opened up new ways of thinking for you?
Absolutely. There were two great directors that influenced me in that way. Well, first of all, at Wisdom Bridge, there was a wonderful casting director there at the time named Doug Finlayson. And Doug said to me one day, he said, "Henry, you need to learn to allow yourself to get angry on stage, in
Hmm.
stuff." I was like, "What?" Because when you grow up with nine brothers and sisters, you grow up fighting, and I was like, "Really? I've like pretty much been angry my whole life." But I understood what he meant. He said, "Listen, you need to go take class with Kyle Donnelly, um, who was teaching Meisner at the time." And I was like, "Oh my God, I just got out of grad school a couple years ago. Really? You're going to tell me to go take a class?" He's like, "Yeah." Um, and it was the best thing I ever did, because it was the part of actor training that was missing from my graduate school training.
Hmm.
It wasn't voice and speech, it wasn't technique, it wasn't Suzuki, it wasn't power, it wasn't, any of that. It was about Meisner. It was about being, and about partner, which is another thing that they really didn't teach us about in grad school, you know? And so Kyle made a huge impression on me. and taught me to be angry. The very first day of class, actually. I got really mad at her, and because she kind of was mean, and it was awesome. And we became great friends. We really actually, well, I actually ended up. I left class that day so angry and stomped onto my car. I thought, I'm not going to take this stupid class. And I sat in my car and I went, hey, it worked. So I literally got out of the car, ran back upstairs and thanked her, and she laughed, and we became great friends.
That's a great
So
story.
it's so funny. And then, and then I auditioned right around that same time for a production of Romeo and Juliet that Michael Maggio was directing at the Goodman, and he cast me as Tybalt. And working with Michael literally changed the rest of my life. He became my mentor as an actor. Uh, he became my mentor as a teacher. He got me into teaching, and he became my mentor as a director. Um, so it was you know, I'm sure I wouldn't be here right now talking to you if I hadn't met Michael Maggio. Um, that's
Well,
the
thank
truth of
goodness
it.
for that.
Yeah, man, seriously. Yeah, yeah. So, I did Tybalt for him, and that was such a beautiful production with Phoebe Cates as Juliet and Michael Cerveris as Romeo, and so many of my great friends, people that are still my great friends that were in it: Peggy Roeder, John Rieger, Christine Thatcher, great, Mike Nussbaum. I mean, it was like,
We talked about the first Latinx play that you worked on.
yeah.
You've come to Chicago now. You're working in a kabuki play in your first production. Um,
Yeah.
how did this thing around being Cuban live in you when you got here, and what was that? What
Well,
was that?
I
Part of your
was
work?
here in Chicago. I was already here in Chicago when Pat Kelly called me and asked me if I would come and do Broken Eggs. And I did, and it was such an incredible experience. And then it sort of like nested in me, it kind of nested in me for the next 3 or so years, until that same season that I did Romeo and Juliet at the Goodman. And then I did Christmas Carol right after that with Michael. Michael had me do Christmas Carol. And then Kyle Donnelly was directing The Rover at the Goodman right after the Carol, and cast me in that show as well. So I did these 3 shows in a row at the Goodman that year. And it was in The Rover, in Kyle's production, that I met Eddie Torres. Eddie was in it. He had just graduated from Roosevelt University and was in the ensemble. And then there was another wonderful Mexican actor named Ramiro Carrillo, and so I'd never been in a play with 3 other Latino actors. Even Broken Eggs in Dallas that Pat directed, there was maybe one other Latino actor. There was one other Cuban actress in that show. Everyone else, they were all American actors playing Cubans. And here I was in this swashbuckler at the Goodman with 2 other Latino actors, and I was like, wow. And the 3 of us just bonded. And Eddie at the time was doing an internship with Remains Theater and had been reading all these scripts for them. And he's like, hey man, I'm reading all this. And I told him, about I'd done Broken Eggs. And he's like, oh my God, yeah, I'm reading all these great new plays, Jose Rivera plays and Migdalia Cruz plays and all these plays. But Remains won't do them because they're like, who's gonna come see those, And they didn't have any Latino actors in their ensemble.
Right.
So Eddie said, why don't we start a theater and we'll do these, I said, okay. We had nothing to lose, so we did a reading. We did a reading of Broken Eggs, huge success. And Eddie said, listen, one of my high school teachers just started this museum down in Pilsen called the Mexican Fine Arts Center Museum. Let's go talk to him, see if he'll let us do a play there. And we did. Carlos Totoleto, who is still the executive director of the museum. And we said, we kind of have this idea, we want to start this Latino theater company, you know. And Carlos said, hey, I'll give you $10,000. You can do it here. They had just renovated this old gym and made a stage. And he's like, you can do it here. And we're like, awesome. And then I found myself right at that same time in San Diego at the Old Globe. I was hired to do a workshop of a new translation of an Argentine play called Made in Lanaus, made in Buenos Aires is the way it was translated to English. Anyway, there I met the translator, Raul Moncada, who translated Made in Lanaus. And I told him about this opportunity to start a company and work at the museum. We're looking for a Mexican play. And he had just translated a Mexican play called, in Spanish, it's called El Viaje de los Cantores, which means literally the journey of the singers. But he translated it as The Crossing. And it's a story about a true story of 18 undocumented immigrants that suffocated in a boxcar, a train boxcar, crossing from Mexico to Texas, that had happened just a couple of years before in the late 80s. And so he let me read the translation, blew my mind. I brought it back. Eddie loved it and the museum loved it. And so they gave us $10,000 and we produced it. It was a big ensemble cast. So that's when we started Teatro Vista.
And so you were a co-founder and the first, if I'm remembering this right, the first artistic director of the company, right?
Yes, I directed that production. I directed The Crossing because we were all actors. Nobody was a director and no one had ever directed a play. And I had directed a play in undergraduate school. And, you know, I had been working with some awesome directors. So I was voted to be the artistic director and I directed that first production.
Were there moments as you were entering into your 30s or in your 30s and where more of that self-consciousness drifted away that you had acquired in grad school, or were there other moments or productions or actors who you said, oh my God, I'm going to steal that, or you're going to open this up in me? I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. There absolutely was. And there were two very formative actors for me like that. They're influential actors. One was when the first time I saw Edward James Olmos on film. And it was by this time he had already done Zoot Suit, of course, which I didn't know about until a little bit later. But then he did this film called Wolfen, and his performance just was like mind-blowing to me. And so that was one. And then I saw, of course, the great Raul Julia in John Cassavetes' film Tempest. And that was a really huge turning point for me, because then I started to find out more about Raul Julia and the fact that he, you know, mostly did theater, he did musicals, but what he really loved was Shakespeare. And I thought, aha, finally, another Latino actor who loves Shakespeare, you know, as much as I did. Sadly, I cannot sing like Raul Julia can, and no way I'm not a tenth of the actor he was. I mean, he was. If you ever want to see a remarkable thing, look up the footage of him and Meryl Streep doing the Kate and Petruchio from the Taming of the Shrew. That was done in the park. That, you know, the famous.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
You know, and it's unbelievable. He played with such freedom and yet such technical skill that I just thought that's what I want to aspire to.
So there were some role models there who aspired successfully in film rather than the stage, but who gave you a
Mm.
sense of.
A sense of direction, I think.
Mhm.
Um, Even though I never got to see Raul Julia on stage, I knew people that did, that saw him in Nine and other things. And just knowing that he really, really was a creature of the stage. Um, because at that time, you know, I was also, doing some film and television stuff here in Chicago and auditioning a lot for film and television stuff. And so it gave me a template for the kind of career that I wanted to have, where I could do Shakespeare and contemporary Latino theater on, at one time, and then maybe go and do a film or television stuff, you know.
Did
Uh,
that work have an influence on your work on the stage at all? In terms of how you, in terms of your acting, in terms of how you presented, or was
yeah,
there?
I think it did. I mean, I think it um, it steered me a little bit more toward sort of messier, realistic sort of acting,
Hmm.
um, and not so presentational. It helped me sort of like sand off the edges of some of my more classical work.
As you were becoming a successful actor, you were also becoming interested in directing more, maybe starting with a Teatro Vista experience,
Yeah,
right? And building that, maybe it didn't seem like a career at first, but became a huge part of your career.
it did.
And you also have become a teacher and taught at
Yeah.
DePaul University and Northwestern University. And I'm interested in if your experiences in those roles has affected how you think about acting, how you operate
Yeah.
in a rehearsal room,
Hmm.
anything.
Yeah. Oh no, I think it definitely has. I think in a couple of ways. Um, I think in one way, it's sort of um, lowered the stakes in a way, and I don't know if that makes sense, but it made me feel a little more buff about my career as an actor. It made me less like, oh my God, I need that job, or it made me less anxious and kind of uptight about, I got to build my acting career,
Mm,
and it taught me that that actually sometimes, giving yourself that freedom can be very freeing in your
mm,
playing. you know it made me bolder when it came to making choices, a little bit more sort of um, unpredictable or erratic in a good way, in a good way, you know,
mhm.
um, that I didn't feel like I had to be such a good soldier when it came to acting. Um,
Yeah.
then there were more specific things that did benefit me, like really understanding, the crafting of an emotional arc for a character, and
Mm,
being able to sort of stand out on the outside of the work and look at it from the outside more objectively, in order to, and then kind of drop back into it, sort of like climbing up to the top of a tree and saying, oh yeah, that's where I need to go, and then going, even with, like, when I teach Shakespeare, it's very, very rigid and specific what you need to learn about scansion and about antithesis and about operative words and imagery and stuff like that. But then, I ultimately find myself telling my students, now you just have to trust all that homework. First of all, you need to be so rigorous in your preparation that you can be free to play, because
mm,
then you can throw it away. Then you can just say, I'm going to trust that homework and I'm just going to play, and be messy, and
right.
be spontaneous, and be intuitive. I mean, and more than anything, what I find myself especially telling my students now is you have to give yourself permission. And I don't think I don't think I ever really did this or knew this consciously before, which is you got to give yourself permission to really, really, really fully inhabit the imaginary given circumstance, the imagination, the make believe, the make
How
believe.
does that,
I
how do you see that working? How does that, how does that happen in you?
just giving myself permission to get lost in the in the make believe, you know. And but specifically and technically it means every time you begin to be self-conscious, or that every time you begin to think, oh my god, there's some, you got to go, you know, I'm not sure if this is a family show or not, or if I can use the F word, but
Yeah.
you know, the F bomb. But you know, as soon as you start having considerations about the audience, or about, am I doing this right, or blah, 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 you got to just say fuck it, you know. Because if we're always judging and evaluating ourselves, it's like putting on a pair of lead boots to go for a jog. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's not gonna
Mm-hmm.
turn out well. You just have to really trust the homework, do the homework. So it's a marriage of both, you know. It really is, you know, finding that balance, you know. Again, there's the Zen thing, you know, like finding the balance between the rigor
Mm-hmm.
and the freedom. And I really believe it's only through rigor that you can obtain the ultimate freedom, you know. I think.
And in a production of Shakespeare, say, right, that rigor is so important because that in some ways the message is in the music of the language,
Right.
but more importantly, it's in the humanity that's being embodied.
Right.
And so right, you need to be open to both halves
Absolutely.
of that equation. Yeah.
Definitely. And that's where, you know, Meisner's whole you know, metaphor of you know, the canoe being the words and the emotion being the river comes in so handy, you know, in playing Shakespeare. Because it's like, you know, if you just have the river, or if you just have the boat, where are you going to get to? Um,
Right.
so yeah, I mean, but that's the fun thing, and that's why I think Shakespeare is the only thing I ever really miss performing. Um,
Mm.
and it's the only thing that really kind of makes me go, okay, I could give up 8 weeks of my life to do this.
It's interesting that one arc for an actor, and the arc that you have followed, is that your career has led you into other areas of the theater as your
Yeah.
primary interest, directing and producing,
Mm.
and I would say community building too.
You know, I think of my role in that respect, I guess what you could call community building. For me, it's about, you know, uh, about keeping my foot in the door for other people to come through, you know. Um, and specifically, I think, I mean, you know, actors of color, especially Latino, Latinx actors, you know. It's important for me because I do lament the fact that I didn't have any of that through all of my educational experience, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking 8 years, right? 4 years of undergraduate school, a year as an apprentice, and 3 years of grad school. 8 formative years without a single Latino role model.
Mm.
Uh, no door being open for me. I mean, many doors were open for me. Michael Maggio opened doors for me. Kyle Donnelly. I mean, all these people opened doors for me. Patrick, you know, Kelly. But I have an extra commitment to, you know, making sure that you know, that other people, that maybe young people that are more like me, would see it. How I got here is sometimes is I find amazing, because I shouldn't be. You know, I should have done what all Cubans do and become a doctor or a lawyer. You know? But I guess I'm not. Thankfully or not thankfully, didn't have the same mental capacity for that, you know, that I had for other stuff.
So
To
when
look
you
at.
choose now at this point in your career where you can say you have the luxury of, instead of feeling the pressure of the next show or doing a good enough job to be hired again. But you have the luxury of saying yes to projects that you are passionate about. What are so the words of Shakespeare are one draw,
You know,
or the stories of
absolutely.
Shakespeare.
Yeah.
What's another hook that would get Henry Godinez to say, yeah, I'm in?
You know, I guess I would have to. I don't know that I can say that. I think it's intuitive. It's what we all do. It's intuitive. You know,
Mhm.
you know when you see it or you feel it. Uh, you
Is it
know,
about a challenge? Is it about a feeling of simpatico
it
or
is.
sympathy with the play?
It is more the former, which is that you know, in a way, that's the way I look at any film or television audition that comes up these days, because I think that's still the undiscovered country for me, or in terms of like the 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 aspect of a career as an actor that I feel, you know, I in many ways I feel like my first, or one of my earliest, not my first, but one of my earliest film experiences was the most successful when I had just taken Kyle's class, you know, so I was just like raw, open heart kind of Meisner work, um, and enough ignorance about film and television that I just, you know, um, but ever since then, I think of it as an opportunity, as a lab. Like I literally go into them going, okay, here's what I would tell my students. So let me actually do everything that I teach
Hmm.
and see if it works, you know. And let me see if I can give myself the freedom to, like, you know, do experiment. Um, you know, the other part, um, when things come up, has to do with either Shakespeare and a role in Shakespeare, like was it last year, pre-pandemic, um, when Bob Falls was doing Winter's Tale at the Goodman, and I've known Bob since those very early days at Wisdom Bridge Theater, and being so enthralled by his production of Hamlet, that his imagination was so huge and vivid. And I always wanted to do Shakespeare with Bob. And in all those years between 1984 and year before last, I'd never gotten that chance. And so when he asked me to play Camillo, I was like, absolutely. Um, but beyond that, it's like 2666, you know, which was his adaptation of this huge, massive
Mm-hmm.
novel by a Chilean writer who lived in exile in Barcelona, Roberto Bolaño. So it was about, for me, that opportunity was about helping to promote this crazy, you know, Spanish Latinx South American writer, right, and material.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then just before that, it was our co-production with Teatro Buendia of Cuba of Pedro Paramo, that we did this amazing co-production with this company in Cuba, the incredible company. Charin Alvarez, who you're going to speak to, I think, at some point. Charin
Mm-hmm.
was one of the 6 of us actor musicians that went to Cuba and joined forces with this company and did this world premiere adaptation of Pedro Paramo, which many people consider the genesis of magical realism. It's a Mexican novel from the 50s. And that, you know, so for me, that was about, one, as a sort of the half producer mind, wanting to make this unique co-production happen, because the director asked me to be in it. I was like, and it was all in Spanish. So to get to do a play in Spanish with Cubans, um, was just amazing, you know.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm super, super blessed to be able to, uh, you know, to focus on those kind of things. And
And
that's
you,
what,
and part of the way you're able to do that is because you are also, I'm going to forget your title here, resident artist,
yeah, resident artistic associate. Yeah, I'm an
artistic
artistic
associate at the
associate.
Goodman Theatre in Chicago. Yeah,
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
great. So
Uh,
that's
So
a
it's
There's some room to
So,
play in there and to find opportunities to further
yeah,
both your artistic journey and your artistic mission, right?
yeah, yeah. It's an artistic home, um, and yeah, and it's a blessing that I'm not so sure I'm worthy of, but I'll take it, whatever. Um, but I remember way back when Michael Cerverus and I would be rehearsing our fights for that Romeo and Juliet way back in 1988 in front of the Art Institute at the old Goodman, and we'd be rehearsing our fights out on the grass there in front of the Art Institute. And Kevin Kline, because he was dating Phoebe at that time, would lean there against the wall, watch us rehearse our fights, and we were like, "Oh my God, that's Kevin Kline's watching us." Um, and I remember thinking one day, "Gosh, I love working at the Goodman. I sure love working at the Goodman. I'd like to work here all the time." And I've been so blessed to get to do that.
As you have matured as a person and lived your life and been
Gotten
married
old.
and had children and gotten older, um, you talked a little bit about how that affected you, but is there um, has that made it easier to act, having those other things in your life, or has it changed the way you think about acting? And the answer can be no. That's all right.
Um, I don't know that it's changed the way I think about acting, but I think, because I think everything we do as actors um, draws on who we are as people,
Mhm.
on our experience as human beings. And so, if anything else, it's just sort of deepened or broadened my pail that I get to go and dip from. Um, I do think uh, that in some ways, having children has really intensified my emotional life as an actor. I remember in 2666, one of the characters I had, was intensely emotional scene, intensely emotional character because his daughter, who's more or less around this, maybe a little older than my daughters were at the time, he knew was getting involved with very, very, very dangerous people,
Mhm.
and was afraid that she could be disappeared. Like all it was sort of around the topic of the disappeared women of Juarez, in
Yeah.
Mexico. And so the stakes of that as a parent became really, really real to me. And my imagination and my preparation every night, um, as Meisner says, you never go on empty. You have to go on emotionally, kind of um, primed. I would I would really, as as painful as it was, I would try to imagine what it would be to endure the death of a child, one of my children, and it's like, and there ain't nothing um, that can begin to compare to that, the intensity of
Mm.
that thought. So I do think it has made that more significant. If that makes any sense at all. you
It
know
does. Totally does to me.
I mean, I still think that the actor's greatest tool is the imagination, and that we can imagine anything. And that's what I think Stanislavski eventually imagined or figured out too, that you can't sense memory everything, you can't emotionally recall emotions you haven't had.
That's right.
But through our imaginations, if it's a fertile imagination and you give it free reign, you can go there. you know
Right. Right. Well, let's just have a little bit of fun here at the end.
okay.
And this is my exercise I call
Woohoo.
3-2-1.
Okay.
Three actors who right now you admire. They can be really well-known people. They can be people known. They can be people working in a storefront theater,
Yeah.
but people that you admire, and just a short reason why.
Well, I'm going to start with my perennial two big people, which are Edward James Olmos and Raul Julia.
Right.
Um, and there's and then I'm going to just have to I've had the good fortune to work with this actor, and I marvel at him, and I so admire him as a human being too. And you're going to be talking to him, and that's James Vincent Meredith, um,
Oh, great.
who I just think is such a skilled, present actor, and such a just a wonderful human being. His work never feels rushed to me.
Mm.
It feels easy. It feels smooth. It feels just right in the pocket, um, and deeply connected, and never shown, never demonstrated, just connected.
Two. I call this trick and treat. Um,
Okay.
so one trick of the trade.
um, Actually, this goes back to my Louisville days.
Hmm.
Smartest thing, John Jory, who was the artistic director of Actors Theater at that time, did a little session with us, and he introduced me to one of his tricks, which I have latched onto, and that's what he called an ancillary action.
Hmm.
And that means, like, if I'm here, Shawn, and I'm doing this monologue where I'm talking to you, I'm at the same time going to be tying my shoe. Okay. And that is my ancillary action. And um, and I have just found that over the years to be so useful, you know, because two things. One, it goes hand in hand with one of my great important mantras, which is imbue every prop with significance, right? Um, and Meisner's whole mantra of, like, acting is the reality of doing. So, it's a combination of those very important uh, truths. And it just helps really ground you in a moment as an actor.
Gives you something, right?
To do.
It gives you something to do and put your focus on,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a secondary focus, right? It's an ancillary action.
And a treat is something
Hmm.
that still gives you delight about performing live.
I mean, I think I have to. It well, it's cheating because it's not really about performing, but it's
Well,
about the people that I get to be around.
yeah,
Our fellow actors. The people in a company that you get to be around. Um, that's the treat for me. You know,
because
because they're as weird as we are, because they're as crazy as we are, because in the world, at large, we don't typically run into people that are as, you know, we're gypsies. I mean, we're weird people that choose to do this for a living. Um, and it's like a strand of humanity that it's nice to be around them. And what I've come to, be so fortunate to learn is that we're everywhere. I mean, I found those people in Spain, I found those people in Mexico and Cuba and
hmm,
Uruguay and Chile. I mean, everywhere.
one thing you still want to get better at as an actor, or you'd like to accomplish, or that you'd want to tick off on your theatrical wish list?
I think I'd have to go back to the film thing, which that's the one thing I feel like just I have still to nail, yeah,
Any
but
parting thoughts you want to share? That anything that I've missed
oh my God,
that you feel are
no.
important for people to know about your journey?
I hope that there's never a day that goes by where I don't give thanks for the opportunities that I've had. And I think that's why I'm so driven to create those opportunities for others now, whether it be as a teacher or as a director, um, because I think what we do makes a difference in the world, and this world needs some difference making.
Well, I thank you for the difference you've made in the Chicago community. Thanks for spending the time with me.
My pleasure, Shawn. Thank you for doing this.